Good afternoon, and I hope you guys are doing really well. I know that we're sort of right on the cusp of our Thanksgiving break, and so I wanted to wish you all well. In the meantime, I wanted to create just a very short presentation. I know a lot of you have been working hard creating gathering research, whether it's popular or scholarly, using databases, or maybe just trying to scour the internet using the sources that are the most relevant, the original reporting sources that are written by sort of reputable news sources, that you're fact checking and being careful about those. I've seen all of your annotations, and I'm really thrilled by the range of ideas and voices that you're finding and interpreting. In this short video, what I wanted to do is just highlight some of the features of scholarly sources, especially when we're looking at them for the first time, or maybe you've come across them before, or maybe just finding them a little bit more difficult to access because of the ways that they're written. The audiences are assumed to be sort of experts in the field, and so it makes it a little bit more tricky when we're trying to think about our research questions and then align them with these voices that are coming from these expert fields. So what I wanted to just remind everyone, and whether we're doing scholarly sources or we're doing working on popular sort of news sources made to be read sort of by a general audience, that when we're reading, we keep in mind that we have that research question, but that we also record, and that's really important, that we have some method of like taking notes, of kind of remembering what we read, marking down specific passages. Remember in APA 7 that you can record direct quotations by the page they land on, but more often than not, we're not reading something that has page numbers. And so where it makes sense to either count paragraph numbers or sections, so labeling the sections, and sometimes we're seeing these sources that are broken up into different sections online as we scroll down, and so indicating to your reader what section that's under is just as helpful. And then retrieving, thinking about how do we write a citation so that we can find that source again. Where do we put these sources when we're gathering them? How do we collect them? And whether you do that in a Google Doc, whether you have some kind of organizational method is up to you, and I'll show you a couple that you have access to. So I'm going to skip through a couple slides, but I just want to remind you that you're doing such a great job with these texts, and continue to read carefully. Engaging with scholarly digital texts, developing cognitive patience is really important. And I read this text by an author called Marianne Wolf, and she wrote a book called Reader Come Home. And she says that the quality of how we read any sentence or text depends on the choices we make with the time we allocate to the processes of deep reading, regardless of medium. It takes years for deep reading processes to be formed. And as a society, we need to be sure that we're vigilant about their development in our young from a very early age. And so she's talking to an audience from the perspective of those who are like raising children or in a field that works with children, but thinking about how carefully we're reading, thinking about the conditions in which we're reading, whether it's sort of a quiet environment where you can focus, or whether we're reading on the fly. It really impacts our ability to recall and remember that and retain that information. A recent study by Time of the media habits of people in their 20s indicated that they switched media sources 27 times an hour. On average, they now check their cell phones between 150 and 190 times a day. And so as a society, we are continuously distracted by our environment and our very writing. And so it's important that we can just continue to think about what are the conditions of our reading, and are we able to sort of retain some of the information that we're reading for these projects that are important and are requiring a sort of elongated sense of concentration. Just a quick note on genre. Some of you, when you're encountering scholarly articles, might be noticing that the studies are primary original research, and some of them might be using research that comes in the form of empirical, quantitative, observed outcomes that use lots of numbers. The results use statistics or data. And I just wanted to let you know that those sources are called quantitative articles. And then there's another kind of article that gathers information and is called a qualitative article. And that kind of article includes kinds of sources that knowledge that might include human experience, like our autoethnographies, include social processes. The data consists of natural language and researcher observations or participants' expressions. rather than numerical data. And so that's just something to keep in mind as we're reading through the scholarship. What kinds of sources are we reading, and where is this information coming from? How is it gathered? And does it fall into a quantitative kind of article or a qualitative article? It's just something that is nice to be able to distinguish and to kind of measure, especially if we're reading through various articles about a similar topic, seeing how those articles are weighing in on their answers or their results in different ways. I thought this was a really helpful visual for some of you who are looking at scholarly articles, thinking about the anatomy of a scholarly article. What exactly is it? How is it organized? And so I'm sharing my PowerPoint link with you so that you can search yourself. And this is, you can go to the slide 11 on our PowerPoint. And what you can actually do is once you're in there, you can click on these different spaces. And this platform will tell you what you're experiencing, what you're reading. What exactly is an abstract? Always expect an introduction. Always expect the sort of results section, and sometimes a discussion section, and then a conclusion, followed by a really nice references list. So if the source you found is like only somewhat related to your research question, it's always helpful to peruse the references section to see if there's anything else that set of researchers used or found to add to the research. And so you can kind of peruse those titles and make sure to have COD library staff or me help you locate these in our own library databases. So I think this is just kind of nice to see how this kind of scholarly article looks a lot different than something that we might see in the New York Times, for example. Its formatting is different, the expectations of readership are different, and the rhetorical situation itself, the content, the audience, and the purpose are all a little bit different as a result of it's being published in a journal that's read by other scholars in the field. As you continue to read, I just want to really urge you to think about your own research questions. It's really easy to become dissuaded, to be confused, or to sort of lose sight of what you found interesting to begin with, especially when you're confronted with an article that has everything to say on the particular topic. So always read with a well-defined purpose. Keep your research question at hand. There may only be part of the article that's actually related or relevant to your research question. And so if that's the case, that's totally fine. Just try to be able to distinguish and continue to distinguish your words, your questions from what the authors are trying to better understand. And those two might not always be the same. And so for you, your job is really to just bridge the connections rather than to say, this is exactly what my research question was. And this is what this is what they found. Always kind of remain abreast of your own purpose, of your own questions, and don't be worried if they don't completely align with the source that you found. As I mentioned earlier and also in the previous week, really writing down what you're reading, taking notes is just so important in terms of retaining and building on the information you've gathered. It's one thing to sort of read through the sources and think that you can kind of hold that all up in your head, but it's another to be able to retrieve that information and to be returning to it at a different time and to accurately represent that. One method that I thought was really helpful is this matrix method, which I've come across a couple years ago, and I have again a link here in this PowerPoint. I've also shared this link with you, I think, in the previous week. But it's just really using like an Excel sheet, for example, as a way to organize the source materials so that you can see them all together in one space. And I think, well, what a great idea that is to have the source's title, when it was published, its purpose, all kind of align next to the other sources. How many pages, or are there page numbers, subject characteristics, sample design. Again, these are all mobile. You can feel free to sort of personalize these labels as you wish. Maybe you'll have one that says like key quotations, for example, or maybe it'll have types of data like interviews versus surveys. Control and intervention. These are all kind of very specific to the sciences, and so feel free to shift your references, your different level settings, and organize the material so you can easily find the segments you wish to incorporate or reference in your own writing. And this will also be helpful in the future if you ever conduct a literature review. This is also a nice, helpful link. I have a link to a Google Doc here that you can save as a document and just add to your own by typing. And what I found really helpful about this piece of information is that it shows you how to cite a source by kind of finding out all the different pieces of that citation. And this is for a scholarly journal article, but it could also work for a popular source. And so what it asks you to do is read really carefully, thinking about the background, methods of the study, results, data, and conclusions. And it's really just a nice way of asking you to read closely and carefully. And the second page asks you to include things that you what is implied or proposed for future study, and why does this research matter? My own thoughts or questions and connections. And so completing one of these for each of your sources is a great way to sort of ingrain what you read, to kind of keep your sources in order, and to kind of clarify which author or set of authors or organization has to say about which topic. For those of you who are going into a field where you think you'll be doing more research and collecting of sources beyond like 5 sources, for example, I worked with a librarian at AU who sort of talks about different citation managers, which are ways that you can collect your sources, organize them, and return to them easily. So it's like a very specific way of creating a bibliography of the sources you've read and kept. And so here at AU, we have, at COD, we have one called Noodle Tools, and it captures your sources and keeps them all in one place. And so for those of you who are interested, you can click on Noodle Tools, and I believe that there'll be some information in terms of how to make yourself an account, and can start collecting sources in this particular fashion if you're brave and want to try that. Thank you so much for listening to this short bit on engaging with scholarly sources. Again, the importance of reading, but a specific kind of focused reading, thinking about how you record and what you record as you're reading, and then having a way to retrieve your information, which we'll be needing as we continue our projects and completing our final project number 3, which is the letter for change. So being able to find your sources, return to them, and share them in your final project will be important. Thank you so much for listening. I know this is a busy week for you, and I hope that your research is going as well as it seems, at least from your drafted annotations. Thanks again, and have a great week.